order. We are meeting in public, actually, and we're welcome to meeting number 115 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Citizenship and Immigration. Before we begin, I ask all persons participating to read the guidelines written on the updated card on the table. These measures are in place to help prevent audio feedback incidents and to protect the health and safety of all participants, including the interpreters. You will also notice a QR code on the card which links you to a short awareness video. Please watch that. And today's meeting is taking place in the hybrid format, but I see all honorable members present in person. I would like to remind participants of the following points. Please wait until I recognize you by the name before speaking. All comments should be addressed through the chair. Whether participating in person or by Zoom, please raise your hand if you wish to speak. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best as we can. I would also like to remind the honorable members again the process that we follow in this committee. If you feel that the witnesses are going too long, instead of interrupting them, I would like you to raise your hand and I will stop the watch so your time is not taken away from you. With that, thank you for your cooperation. And now we are pursuing to going to the study of pension transferability and access to mandatory provident fund and delays in permanent residence and visas for Hong Kongers. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on February the 12th, May the 1st, and June the 12th, 2024, the committee is resuming its study of pension transferability and access to mandatory provident fund and delays in permanent residence and visas for Hong Kongers. On behalf of the committee members, I would now like to welcome our witnesses for today's meeting, and I will start with the Department of Citizenship and Immigration, Director General, Family and Social Immigration Policy, Mr. James McNamee. Welcome. And from the Tax Treaties and Tax Legislation Division, we have Senior Director, Madam Stephanie Smith. Welcome. From Financial Sector Policy Branch, we have Senior Economist, Mr. Jeffrey Smith. Mr. Smith, welcome. And last but not the least, we have Director, Pensions Policy, Financial Crimes and Security Division, Ms. Kathleen Rai. Welcome to all of you. And with this, up to 5 minutes will be given for the opening remarks, after which we will proceed with the round of questions. And I'm going to invite Mr. McNamee for 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to start by recognizing that I am joining you today on the traditional unceded territories of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. I would also like to state that I'm accompanied by my colleagues from the Department of Finance. Canada stands shoulder to shoulder with the people of Hong Kong, and we continue to monitor the situation as they navigate the impacts of the new Article 23 national security legislation. IRCC has also implemented special measures to allow individuals from Hong Kong to come to Canada with pathways to permanent residence. The demand for these pathways remains high, so that no one loses their status in Canada. A new policy was launched on May 27th, allowing applicants to have access to a new open work permit and to remain in Canada. As I said in my previous appearance, IRCC is responsible for the issuance of Canadian permanent resident cards, which are intended to prove permanent resident status. Some individuals from Hong Kong are also using them as proof that they have left Hong Kong permanently. In March 2021, the Hong Kong government indicated that it would no longer recognize British national overseas BNO passports as identification. It appears at that same time, individuals with a PR card associated to their BNO passport were no longer able to access their pension funds. IRCC remains committed to taking action where possible to assist Hong Kong nationals in establishing themselves in Canada. Thank you again for the opportunity to join you today. I would be happy to answer your questions.
Again, I would like to acknowledge that I am speaking to you today on the traditional and unceded lands of the Algonquin Anishinaabe peoples. I would like to acknowledge that I am joined by my colleagues from the Department of Finance. Canada stands shoulder to shoulder with the people of Hong Kong, and we continue to monitor the situation as they navigate the impacts of the new Article 23 national security legislation. RCC has also implemented special measures to allow individuals from Hong Kong to come to Canada with pathways to permanent residence. The demand for these pathways remain high. To help ensure that no one loses their status in Canada while waiting for a decision on their permanent resident application, a new public policy was launched on May 27, 2024, that will give most applicants to the permanent resident pathways an opportunity to obtain a new open work permit and remain in Canada while they'll await a decision. As mentioned in my previous appearance before the committee on June 5, 2024, IRCC is responsible for the issuance of Canadian permanent resident cards, which are intended to prove permanent resident status. Some individuals from Hong Kong are also using them as proof that they have left Hong Kong permanently. In March 2021, the Hong Kong government indicated that it would no longer recognize British national overseas BNO passports as identification. It appears that at the same time, individuals with PR card associated to their BNO passport were no longer able to access their pension funds. IRCC remains committed to taking action where possible to assist Hong Kong nationals in establishing themselves in Canada. Thank you again for the opportunity to join you today. I welcome any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we are going to Mr. McLean for 6 minutes. Please go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. Is there a separate introduction coming from the officials from finance, or are we hearing the same? Just one introduction. Okay, thank you.
Just one.
But my questions are to mostly the finance officials that are here. So thank you very much. Mr. Smith, you've been here before. Welcome, Ms. Rye. Welcome, Ms. Smith. The main questions we have here are your role, your department's role in finance in regulating a Canadian entity here, two Canadian entities, particularly Sun Life and Manulife, and how that regulation impacts when they've got foreign subsidiaries that are regulated by a separate entity. So it's that overarching regulatory authority where you're looking after how they behave in Canada with respect to people in Canada that might be permanent residents. Can you give us a little explanation about how you're overseeing the way you regulate these entities in Canada once they're dealing with people that are Canadians who've come here, in this case from Hong Kong, and can't access their Hong Kong pension?
Go ahead, Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your question, Mr. Member. There's no precedent for this situation within the financial regulatory framework. I can say that unequivocally.
So no precedent. I'm trying to. This is the second time you've been before this committee, Mr. Smith, and your colleagues. We're trying to see how you might be influencing decision makers here, particularly the minister, on the way the government deals with this situation regarding people who've come from Hong Kong that are trying to get their pensions moved over to Canada. Have you given any advice to any minister about how this should be dealt with?
Mr. Smith,
Thank you. No, we have not given any advice to the Minister of Finance on this issue. The operations.
Oh, excuse me, I said any minister.
please, I said, please raise your hand, and because it's very hard on the interpreters like this, so I will stop the watch and I would ask Mr. Smith to continue.
Pardon me for the lack of specificity. We have not given any recommendations to any ministers on this issue.
Honorable member.
So your role here is overseeing the regulated entities, which are Canadian entities, correct?
Ms. Smith,
Canadian and foreign entities operating within Canada, yes.
honorable member.
And so the issue we're trying to get to the bottom of this here is how you regulate Canadian companies that have contradictory regulatory requirements in foreign jurisdictions through their subsidiaries. Is there a way of getting through that morass and ensuring that those regulated Canadian entities fulfill the requirements to get Canadians, new Canadians in this case, the funds they're due from their retirement funds?
Ms. Smith,
The foreign operations of Canadian financial institutions are subject to the laws and regulations of the foreign jurisdictions in which they operate. We don't have any authority to compel Canadian financial institutions operating in a foreign jurisdiction to disobey the laws of that foreign jurisdiction.
So when those Canadian entities are trying to get funds for Canadians, no matter where those Canadians come from a fund that exists elsewhere that they have put into, is that where your regulatory authority looks into their Canadian operations?
Ms. Smith,
Our regulatory authority applies to their Canadian operations strictly.
honorable member.
Yes, that's what I'm asking. So they're Canadians that are in Canada, and those are Canadians being served by, in this case, a Canadian registered company. And are those Canadian registered companies subject to Canadian laws about regulations about how they deal with Canadians who have put money in passports elsewhere? Is there any protection for those Canadians for getting their repatriated pension earnings back to Canada?
Ms. Smith,
In this instance, no. We regulate the domestic operations of those financial institutions that are operating within Canada. As I previously noted, any Canadian financial institutions that are operating in a foreign jurisdiction must still comply with the laws and regulations of that foreign jurisdiction in which they operate.
honorable member.
Can you let us know if there's any way that you're involved in this situation at all?
Mr. Smith,
Could you kindly elaborate on involved?
I'll stop the watch. Please go ahead. Honorable member.
By involved, I would mean that you're providing any input or policy advice to any part of government regarding how this situation should be dealt with or ameliorated.
Mr. Smith,
No, we are not involved in that respect.
honorable member.
Can you please tell us what respect you are involved in this matter?
We have met with Hong Kong Watch in the past, about a year ago, and we have met with the Canadian financial institutions in question. Those meetings had a common theme. We were trying to understand the issue a little bit better.
Seconds, honorable member.
So your meetings with these people, did they lead to anything regarding a course of action that would, fix the situation at hand?
Mr. Smith,
There is no course of action under which the Department of Finance has any authority.
thank you very much, honorable member. The time is up, and we will go to Mr. El Khoury. Mr. El Khoury, we will give you 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to mention to you, I would like to share my last minute with my colleague, Mr. Paul Shane. Merci et bienvenue à
Thank you and welcome to our witnesses. My first question is for Mr. McNamee. Mr. McNamee, in your opinion, what are the specific challenges Hong Kongers who have a BNO passport are facing about the British withdrawal of Hong Kong when they come to Canada?
Mr. McNamee.
Je dirais que
I would say that the primary challenge is that the passport was not recognized for the access to pension funds in Hong Kong. So that's the number one challenge. After that, they're able to obtain the permanent residency card with this passport, and once they do, it is usable. I would say that the challenge is access to the Hong Kong pension fund. Inaudible for the interpreter. How is the department addressing this challenge? We are redoing the card for someone who prefers a new identification or passport, for example. If they have a Canadian passport, a Hong Kong passport, or a Chinese passport, they can exchange it for a permanent residency card to facilitate access to the pension fund. And in your opinion, is that easier? We have an open system for changing the permanent residency card. And we also have prepared the option to do so more efficiently if ever that's needed.
deuxième question.
My second question is for Ms. McNamee. What, in your opinion, are the initiatives underway to inform Hong Kongers in Canada of their rights and options when they are facing obstacles and problems, including access to their overseas assets? The question? Thank you for the question. We have information on our website where clients can find the information they need on how to get their permanent residency card. And we also have the option to undertake a communications process where we inform everyone of what is available to them. But we have also noted that some people have already changed their documents. And the documents for the moment the numbers are not large as we thought. And that means that we could do more to communicate to our clients that this option does exist to change their card for a permanent residency card. You said you could do more. Why aren't you? We know that the option exists, but our clients have asked for a certain number of them. But demand has not been growing since the issue arose a few years ago. Ms. Rai, were agreements or frameworks established to facilitate Hong Kongers' access to their mandatory provident fund, in particular for those who now have permanent residency or Canadian citizenship? Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. I will answer in English.
Claire.
Very clear.
To confirm also, when you speak to an agreement, I'm just not familiar with speaking to, I can speak to federally regulated pension plans and how non-residency unlocking occurs here, but I'm not aware of any agreements in existence that would facilitate the unlocking of the MFP pension benefits.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chang.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had put a notice on Friday, my motion, which I would like to put in today, that upon the tabling of the supplementary estimate B for the fiscal year 2024-2025, the committee invites the Minister of Immigration, Refugee, and Citizenship to testify on the supplementary estimates B by no later than the end of the current supply period. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. So we have the witnesses in place. So what, I have to take the orders and we have to debate this. Motion is in order. And I have MP Kwan. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before we get into debate and or the next steps, could you clarify for me, isn't it the practice of this committee to actually invite the minister for supplementary estimates? That is actually our regular practice, and we have actually been inviting the minister, no?
If everybody's in agreement, then we can.
I just need a clarification, because it is the practice of this committee to invite the minister, and we have been inviting the minister. And if the minister chooses not to attend, that is the reality of what this committee is faced with. So to move this motion, of course, is stating the obvious, because it is the practice of this committee to have the minister attend for supplementary estimates.
I would say that it's usually, it's not necessary, but it's usually been, the practice going on here to have a motion bringing forward. So I would say that the motion is in order, and I'm going to go to the debate. If there's no debate, I'm going to take a vote. So
I just want to make a final comment. Just to say this, in many ways, I'm not going to oppose the motion. It's a redundant motion, is my point. And the point is that it is the practice of this committee, and it is a standing practice of this committee, to have the minister show up for supplementary estimates in a timely fashion. The fact that the minister doesn't is not because of this committee's lack of action, but rather the minister's refusal to show up. Just want to state that on the record.
And any more debate? Otherwise, we can take a vote. Mr. McLean.
Well, I'll second what Mrs. Kwan saying. And that is exactly the case. The minister has a responsibility to show up here. It's not a motion that can be voted up or down. He's got a responsibility to show up here to present his estimates to this committee so they can be forwarded to the House of Commons. I don't know why we have a redundant motion here.
Thank you, Mr. McLean. I will go to MP Zahid, then Mr. Chang.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it has been the practice that the minister comes, but we have always passed a motion. Once the motion is passed, then the clerk sends out the invite, finds out the date which the minister can appear before the committee. So last 9 years, I think that's what the procedure we have followed through. So we have to pass a motion so that the clerk can send in the request. Thank you.
Thank you. MP Chang, you want to add something? No?
I'm good. Thank you.
You're good. Everybody's good, so we can take a vote. All in favor? Oh, wow. Looks like anyone opposed? None. Carried. So your time is up, Mr. Chang. And now we are going to my dear friend, Mr. Bruno Desapp, for 6 minutes. Mr. Bruno Desapp, before I start the watch, I know it's a French conversation sometimes, but there are English speakers here too. They need interpretation, so I will make sure I'll keep your time in mind. So please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's always great to have those recommendations from you. Before getting started, I thank you to the witnesses for joining us. I would like to table a notice of motion that I will read very slowly, and I sent it to our interpreters and to our friends. It is not translated, but as it is a notice of motion, it will be translated. at some point. That pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee undertake a study of the consequences for Canada of the measures announced by Donald Trump during the U.S. presidential campaign concerning the deportation of persons illegally present in the United States, and of the Canadian federal government's plan to ensure border security and compliance with federal immigration law and policies. That the committee invite the following witnesses to testify: 1, for 2 hours each, accompanied by senior officials from their respective departments. A, Mark Miller, Minister of Immigration and Citizenship, and B, Dominic LeBlanc, Minister of Public Safety. 2, for 1 hour each. A, Ms. Kirsten Hellman, Canadian Ambassador to the United States. B, Mr. David L. Cohen, U.S. Ambassador to Canada. 3, as well as any witnesses the committee deems necessary, in accordance with the committee's usual practices, that the committee give priority to this study and report its observations to the House. And now I have given notice of this motion, and I hope that everyone will give it the attention it deserves. Yes, that took me some time. Good afternoon, everyone. On June 3rd, 2024, Eden Coverley, who is the co-founder of ConWatch and Hong Kong Watch, appeared before this committee, and he was prevented from, he was representing Hong Kongers in Canada who were unable to access their pension funds. And based on the research, over 80% of Hong Kongers have permanently moved to the UK and Canada, and they have had their pension transfer funds rejected. But in Sun Life in 2021, and the company rejected 1.2% of the some 14,000 requests received for not respecting the criteria or for minor administrative reasons. My question is not complicated. In your department, do you have the numbers for the withdrawals of the MPF, and for what reasons were they not made? We don't really have the numbers for refusals because those organizations hold the numbers, either Sun Life or other groups. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Are you in contact with these insurance companies? Answer: not directly. Not directly. We have indirect contact with them. We have had some contact with them to find out why this is happening, and according to them, the process, as my finance colleague said, is managed by the law that exists in the country of origin, and they are required to refuse these applications. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Chair, rather. It is a bit strange. You just said that you don't have the numbers and that you don't necessarily have the reasons for the refusals. And to the following question, you said, yes, we have contact, indirect contact with them. So there is some contact. Did it ever occur to you to ask for those numbers from the insurance companies and therefore to ask for the reasons why for refusal from these companies, since you said you are in contact with them? Thank you for the question. I think that we need to find out more about why the situation is occurring. But we haven't really sought out all the details with them on these refusals because it falls under their field of responsibility. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I understand. So you were in contact with them. You're trying to understand why these refusals are occurring, but you haven't pushed farther. for us. It's difficult to understand because obviously we are doing business with people who are experiencing transnational repression. So what Hong Kong has established as a criterion for these people so that they cannot withdraw their money is indirectly using these companies, and therefore by also using the criteria of your department indirectly, you are participating. And I know it's not voluntarily, but are you aware that you are participating in a transnational repression by adjusting criteria and by not asking these companies to adjust their own criteria?
Brièvement, s'il vous plaît. Le temps file. Votre réponse.
Thank you very much for the question. I would say that we have chosen an option to help people have access to their pension funds by changing their permanent residency card information. And that is the control that we have over these cards. And sometimes people were refused because of the codes on the card. So the Department of Immigration would like to change its policy, but we can't really do exactly that to resolve the situation because we would have to change the codes, and we have the right to do that. That is our position. That is why we have done this for clients who wish to change their codes.
Now we will go to MP Kwan for 6 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the officials for appearing before our committee today. In the opening statement, it was stated that the Government of Canada stands with the people of Hong Kong, and so there are special immigration measures that has been implemented, and the part of which was to extend the temporary status for Hong Kongers. Could the officials confirm that those who qualify under that program are provided with an open work permit and therefore a LMIA is not required?
Mr. McNamee.
I would say that that's generally the case. If the work permit they obtained originally was connected to the public policy, that's correct. I don't know that in all cases that's the situation. In some cases, applicants may have had a LMIA-based work permit to begin with.
Right, but under the special immigration measure, the LMIA is not required. I have, however, a list of applicants in those circumstances whereby their work permit renewal application was rejected and they were asked to submit an LMIA, which makes no sense. And so I want to flag that as a deep concern because that is now emerging with people whose open work permit is being rejected. So you can imagine as they wait for their permanent resident status, and at this rate, given the immigration levels plan numbers and the processing delays that's happening, it's going to take, and then with a number of applicants in place, it's going to take something like 8 years to get through the backlog for people to be able to get their PR status, which means that if they're trying to get their pension, they will not be able to do so for 8 years because they are required to provide proof of permanent residency. So I want to flag this as a major concern, and I hope that the department will take action to fix the error that is being applied for applicants whose open work permit is being rejected under this stream. Can I get that confirmation from officials that that will be undertaken?
Mr. McNamee.
Yes, that issue has been raised with the department already, and we're looking into it to see what has exactly happened in those situations.
Okay, so the officials are aware of it, and yet it's still happening. I've got cases coming to me that's happening, and I'm about to prepare a giant pile of this stuff for the minister, so I hope that the officials will fix that. So now the other thing, of course, is that related to the pension is the fact that the lengthy delays for people to get their permanent status. Based on this immigration levels plan and the number of applicants that's in place, is it the officials' anticipation that it would take about 8 years to get those applications processed?
Mr. McNamee,
We have looked at that possibility. Certainly, it will take longer than we had previously indicated to the committee. But I would note that the first year of the levels plan is a fixed year. The years that follow, in this case 26 and 27, are flexible. So there are opportunities to adjust those numbers in the future, and that could affect that timeline. So it's hard to say whether 8 years will be the timeline, but it will be longer than had been originally predicted because the numbers have gone down.
What's the projection of the officials in the timeline that these applications would be processed
Mr. McNamee,
based on what has been tabled by way of the immigration levels plan?
So overall, because we don't break down the specific targets for specific subgroups within the HNC and public policy categories, our estimates would be that it would take 4 years for those applications to be processed. That was our base estimate. But you're correct that depending on where those numbers go, that could be longer or could be less. And I'm saying that only the first year of the plan is a fixed year, and plans can change and adjustments can be made.
Well, thank you very much. Yes, the government decided to table rolling 3-year immigration levels plan. And then, so those are the numbers that we're using, assuming that those are the numbers. Of course, subsequent times, perhaps even a change in government may well adjust all of those things. We don't know. But this is what we do know are the numbers that's before us. And based on my calculation, with the number of people that's applied, it's going to be a projected at least 8 years to get through the backlog. By the officials' calculation, it's at least 4 years. So for people who's desperate to actually get resources, is it reasonable that they won't be able to apply for their pension funds for at least 4 years?
I think we acknowledge that that is a challenge. But so we're looking at what we can do to help facilitate and expedite that process. My apologies. The HNC category is oversubscribed. We have a lot of competing priorities, and it includes high priorities like other categories of people that we must process under the same space.
Well, thank you very much. Yes, there is a desperate need in the global context of people who are displaced and who are fleeing persecution. And Canada wants to claim that it's doing its part, but it's not doing it in an effective way for people. Is it feasible for people to be in limbo for years on end without knowing what their status is? And meanwhile, they run into problems with respect to application for jobs, with for students who are under student visa, their student fees is at least 5-6 times that of a domestic student. And then those who are trying to get their pension would not be able to do so for years on end. Is that a feasible way and a reasonable thing for the Canadian government then to say that they stand with the people of Hong Kong?
thank you. The time is up, but I will give Mr. McNamee the opportunity to speak.
To that, I would say that the primary job of that public policy was to enable people to leave Hong Kong and find the safety of Canada. And I think by and large, that has been achieved. People have been able to come here, obtain temporary status, and benefit from the protection of Canada. So from that score, I think it's been successful in doing so. Yes, there are challenges with the transition to permanent residence, but in light of what the purpose was originally, which was to take them away from a situation of risk, that has been delivered for the most part.
Thank you very much. And we will go to now Mr. Kmitch for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair.
Let me stop the watch. Okay, go ahead.
Mr. McNamee, first of all, on this PR card changes, I've never heard of this. When did this policy change?
I think from the outset, people have had the opportunity to modify their PR card with the submission of a new document, be a new passport.
I'm going to interrupt you. I'm going to do a lot of this rapid fire. Where did they submit that request?
We have information on our website to do that. It's a $50 process today, which we're looking to facilitate because of the situation.
Sorry, Chair, but you have to be much more specific. There are a lot of Hong Kongers watching this. So what is the form number? Where is it on the website?
I can provide that information to the committee. I don't have it here, but it is a standard process, one that doesn't happen frequently, but that we're looking to expedite.
Is this just for Hong Kongers, or anybody can request a PR change for that nationality code?
If they submit information regarding a new passport, yes, you can modify your PR card to reflect the new information.
And you're saying this has always been the case?
Yes.
Okay, that's new to me. How many requests of such changes have there been since the last committee meeting from Hong Kongers?
My understanding is the number has been quite small, and I can provide that information to the committee.
When you do provide it, I would like to also know how many requests came in and how many were accepted for the change from the GPN to something else, because the source of the problem for BNO passport holders to Canada has been that's how the MPFA is able to identify a person who has left the country on a BNO passport. And you're saying this has always been the case. So fine, but we would like the information for the entire committee so then we can post it online, including the form, the precise form that is needed and where must it be sent, including an email contact information and a phone number. So the Hong Kongers who are coming to see MP Kwan, my office, and all of our offices stop doing that and go to see your department, because your department's inability to fulfill the requirements on time is causing all of them to inundate our offices with problems. I've gotten the same sheets that MP Kwan has of individual cases where they've been refused the renewals. You said during your introduction as well that a person has implied status. Is that implied status until the application is considered for PR?
Yes. Yes, an application submitted, the maintained status is retained until a decision.
So I have two letters here, two Hong Kongers, who says their implied status will expire 5 months after they apply. So this, I'm going to finish now. So it says here, please attach this letter to your present work permit number, and it's obviously a filled-in form, as proof that you're authorized to continue working under the same conditions as your original work permit until December 25th, 2024. Big Merry Christmas to them, I guess. And I have one here that was issued July 26th, and it says their temporary status will expire, and it says January 22nd, 2025. Based on your own testimony today, you've basically said that none of these people will get it within 5 months. The timeline for processing for their PRs can be up to 8 years. The way that's a number that MP Kwan has. That's because Hong Kongers are telling us this number. And if we use the target numbers that you have, it's 14 years. All these people will lose their implied status. So how could you have said to this committee that they do have implied status until their PR is processed, but the letters the department is issuing say the complete opposite, that they have merely 5 months?
I haven't seen one of those letters in a while, but I believe they also say, or until you have a decision. The faster of the two or something.
Whichever is first. That means January 22nd, 2025 will come first if it's an 8-year timeline. That means December 25th, 2024. Merry Christmas to that person. It's an optician in my writing, and the husband will lose their jobs because they won't be allowed to work. Whichever comes first. Their wait time is 8 years, according to the testimony we've heard here.
Mr. McNamee.
I can tell you today that that's an error. That letter should not state that. You're
hundreds of letters. So is this an error or is it a process issue?
Mr. McNamee.
It's a error in the wording of that letter. The regulations state that folks have maintained status until they receive a final decision on their application. Be it 1 year or 10, they have maintained status. That's the law. The letter states that, and we're looking to amend it.
I'm sorry, when it comes to legal, this is what the lawyers get. This is what immigration consultants get. This is what every MP office is getting right now. And it says very distinctly, or until a decision is made on your application, whichever is first. And the timeline is always less than 8 years. So that if this is incorrect, your department's been sending out letters in the mail, hundreds and hundreds of letters. And there's 60,000 Hong Kongers here through this pathway program. So are you saying they're all getting a wrong letter?
you. The time is up, but I will give the floor to Mr. McNamee to address those concerns and in the best interest of Hong Kongers.
I will say that when that letter was the form letter was originally created, we were within a much faster processing time. So that time, that date that was given in the future was many months in the future, and usually clients got a decision way ahead of that. In recent months, with delays, it's taking longer. So we've asked to amend that letter and remove that reference to make it clear that persons can maintain status until they get a decision, period. There's no limitation on that.
Thank you. And we will now go to MP Kaibaga for 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, I would just like to maybe keep the conversation going on the letters that my colleague on the other side has. Can we just get an answer on how these letters that contain errors and incorrect information got out, and were you aware that these letters were being sent out?
The standard form letter has stated that for several years now, because it was a timeline that was well within our processing service standard for that type of application or work permit, for example. In recent months, as that time has been exceeded, that date now sometimes arrives before a decision arrives. So we've taken measures in the department to modify that letter, hoping that change can happen sooner than later, so that it doesn't state that anymore. But I just want to confirm that maintained status is maintained status, and it is valid until a decision is made, whenever that decision comes.
Can I just get you, through you, Mr. Chair, on the record, so the people who received those letters will be getting other letters with the correct information, and when will that be happening?
I'll come back to you on that, to the committee, exactly what the process will be, but we are modifying that letter.
Through the chair, your department is also tracking that there's hundreds of these letters out as well, and has
Yes.
the resources to be able to address this issue.
But I would note that many people get a decision before that timeline. In certain circumstances, they don't, but many do.
Thank you. I wanted to get to a finance question through you, Chair. From the finance perspective, your point of view on what your actual role is in all of this, and what is the core of the issue here regarding providing pensions
Ms. Smith.
benefits to Hong Kongers in Canada who have made claims.
Ms. Smith, can you speak closer to the mic because interpreters had a bit of a difficulty. So please go ahead.
Sorry, just to repeat, because through the chair, what is your perceived role?
Our perceived role in this issue, we regulate financial institutions on a domestic basis. We have no authority to compel those financial institutions to disobey the laws of the foreign jurisdictions in which their subsidiaries operate.
What, thank you, and through the chair again, what accountability measures exist to ensure that financial institutions like Manulife and Sun Life are actually representing their approval rates and following the fair practices?
Global Affairs Canada maintains the National Contact Point Office, which would be the appropriate point of contact for any groups or individuals who feel that Canadian firms operating abroad are not behaving responsibly.
Perhaps you can elaborate on how IRCC collaborates with Global Affairs Canada to address the concerns raised by Canadian residents and citizens about accessing their financial resources overseas.
I'm sorry, I think that question would be better directed at my colleague from IRCC.
You want to address?
Apologies, Chair. I missed the question.
Okay, watch, and I will ask honorable member to repeat the question.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, the question is, what is the collaboration between Global Affairs Canada and IRCC to address the concerns by Canadian residents and citizens in accessing their financial resources overseas?
Mr. McNamee.
We have been working with Global Affairs to look into this issue, and it's through this process that we were able to understand what was happening in terms of access or lack of access to those funds due to that change that happened in 2021. So we continue to work with them to see what can be done about that, and as a result, we've taken upon ourselves to look at a change in the card for those who can provide another passport as a solution that could help overcome that challenge in the short term.
Seconds.
Quickly, through another finance question through your chair. What is your role in monitoring the financial institutions' compliance with international standards and fair treatments of Canadians with PRs and citizens?
Mr. Smith.
It's my understanding that we don't have a specific role in monitoring Canadian financial institutions meeting their obligations within the HKSAR.
Thank you, MP Kaibaga. We will go to my dear friend Bruno Duceppe for 2.5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Parfait. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Perhaps I wasn't clear enough in my last round of questions. I don't want you to think that I'm picking on you. It's really not you, but what I think is that currently the authorities in Hong Kong are using the Canadian government and using Canadian insurance companies like Manulife and Sun Life to carry out transnational repression. I'm not saying at all that it's voluntary on your part. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying that currently, and I would like to know whether you're aware, that is my question. Are you aware, do you realize that through you and the insurance companies, the Hong Kong authorities are conducting transnational repression using you as a tool and the insurance companies? Do you realize that? Are you aware?
Mr. McNamee.
Thank you for the question. Well, I don't really have an answer to the question because it's a change that the government of Hong Kong made about the types of documents that, Mr. Chair, there are two ways to answer that question. Unfortunately, I cannot accept that that you don't have an answer to that question, because being aware or realizing something is a yes or a no. There is no, I don't know. Does your service realize that involuntarily you are participating in transnational repression by Hong Kong authorities? It can be no or yes. It can't be I don't know. Mr. McNamee. Well, once again, I am unable to say whether or not I agree with that proposition, because it's not my role to have an opinion about the situation as a public servant. We have our regulations and our rules, and we try to do what we can within our own domain of responsibility. I understand, but thank you, Mr. Brunel Duceppe.
Now we will go to MP Kwan for this is the last honorable member before we switch to the next panel. So MP Kwan, 2.5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I just want to get back to these letters that has been issued to tell people that there's a deadline with their interim status. Will the officials be putting or issuing a public statement to let people know that this is an error It's an old template that has been used where processing time used to be more expeditious, so that they're now not caught out in this situation thinking that their implied status would actually be expiring towards the end of the year. How will the officials fix this problem? Because I'm aware that some people went to apply for jobs, and then when they can only tell the employer that their implied status will only last a couple of years, that they were declined an offer of the position. The damage is already done.
I will take that back to the department to see exactly how we're going to proceed. As a first step, we are amending that letter.
Sorry, I get it. You're amending it going forward, but the letters already went out. The damage is already there. And the question is, what will the officials do to fix that problem for people? The other issue is, on the question around and to the letters that Mr. Kimmich has put on the record, I met with the Hong Kong Young Professional Association folks just this last break week, and literally scores of people came to tell me about the problems that they're faced with, and this is as a result of the government's failure to properly process their application and to expeditiously process their PR application. And then now this interim measure has created further problems for them. So this has to be fixed. It has to be fixed expeditiously. And then there's a question about what work needs to be done and what action will be taken by the officials retroactively for the people who has already been negatively impacted as a result of this error.
I would say that we'll take this back to the department and come back to you on an approach going forward.
I would, Mr. Chair, would we request officially that there be a formal response to the committee from the officials on this problem that we have identified, and to outline exactly the steps and the timeline of what those steps would look like to rectify this problem.
Thank you, MP Kwan. The time is up. On behalf of the committee members, I want to thank the panel members. Thank you for being here and sharing the information. Very best to you. And with that, I suspend until we get to the next panel. Welcome back. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on October the 24th, 2024, the committee is resuming its study of the recent reforms to the International Student Program. I would now like to welcome our witnesses for the second panel. With us, we have Professor Herb Emery, who's online with us. Welcome, Mr. Emery. And we also have Professor Christopher Warswick in person. Mr. Warswick, welcome. And we also have from the University Quebec, Mr. Maxime Colleray. I hope I spell your name right. Good. Thank you. Now, up to 5 minutes will be given to each of the speakers. Who want to go first? No hands up. I will give Mr. Emery then the first to speak. Mr. Emery, please go ahead for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I was kind of hoping Professor Warswick would go first, but I'm Herb Emery, and I hold the Vaughan Chair in Regional Economics at the University of New Brunswick. My research is focused on policy options for growing the regional economy and understanding labor market adjustment in a subnational context. I've benefited from working with the new UNB-based New Brunswick Institute for Research Data and Training, led by Dr. Ted McDonald, which allows for access to de-identified linked administrative data, which provides new perspectives on subjects like immigrant retention in the region and post-secondary graduate outcomes in New Brunswick. Recent changes to the cap and numbers of international students and changes to raise financial barriers for international students seeking to attend Canadian post-secondary education institutions, which includes limits on work hours off campus, will have important impacts for our PSE institutions, post-secondary education institutions in the Atlantic region, and it may have important impacts on regional labor supply, population growth, and productivity growth. But given the economics of our labor markets in this subnational setting, I expect the main impacts of the region will be for the post-secondary education institutions and their finances, and a large number of small employers reliant on labor-intensive production and service provision. Since 2016, when I moved to the Atlantic region, I've encountered 5 major reasons stakeholders and governments provide for growing numbers of international students enrolled in colleges and universities in the region. The first one is a population growth goal. The 4 provinces that make up the Atlantic region all face challenges of population aging and outmigration of their own residents. Immigration was identified as an effective way to backfill for interprovincial outmigration and eventually grow the size of the region's population. International students were just one more provincially targeted entry program to increase immigrant numbers to the region. Second, with declining population aging and a declining demographic of the usual ages that attend post-secondary education, it was seen as international students would provide revenue for post-secondary education and also boost enrollment numbers, which was going to be a problem when you have stagnant provincial grants to the institutions and along with caps on increases in fees for domestic students. So immigration was going to solve a revenue problem for post-secondary education institutions. Third, the goal was to create a pool of labor for low-wage jobs for students who needed to work while they were pursuing their studies. And this was coming on the heels of the region losing its traditional glut of low-skill, low-wage labor that had been a source of competitive advantage in many of its industries like manufacturing. But with that glut gone, it was ideal to find a source of labor who would take jobs that a lot of Canadians, particularly younger ones, weren't keen to take. So that was the second avenue, and that's what was also leading for some of the lobbying for very long work hours for full-time students. Fourth, economic growth and innovation objectives were to be met by international students graduating from programs in the region and being retained who would become entrepreneurs, innovators, and skilled workers to raise regional productivity. And last, It's also been identified that with the outmigration of high qualified personnel, having regionally educated international students, they could backfill in strategic sectors like IT and ICT to keep some kind of strategic advantage for the region seeking to grow some of these new industries. It should be immediately apparent that higher numbers of international students in the region were to address a number of diverse goals and challenges: population growth, growth of university and college resources, provide a pool of low-cost labor, and over the long run, increase productivity in the region. The goals may have differed across interests and stakeholders in the region, but the interest in higher numbers of students did not. Consequently, support for higher numbers of international students has generally been high, and it was seen as having a number of diverse benefits for the near term and over the long term for the region. Research that I and colleagues at NB-IRDT have carried out suggests that the main impacts of all this increase in international students would have been for post-secondary education finances and for providing a transitory supply of low-cost labor for the region's employers. There hasn't been an increase in retention rates of immigrants over the long run in the region. There isn't a large supply of transitions of students into permanent residency in the region. It is higher when they have work permits, but it's still, I would say, a minority share of the total immigration increase that has been coming in. So in evaluating the impacts of the recent steps, more discussion needs to be focused on what goals are trying to be achieved with the International Student Program and how the powers and responsibilities of the provinces and their post-secondary education institutions, which are recruiting the students, align with those interests for meeting the stated program goals versus meeting their own needs and goals that they're setting on their own. I think a big problem for the region has been this misalignment of the agency of the institutions in recruiting not being aligned with what was trying to be achieved with some of the larger goals of that program related to growth of the region in terms of its economy and population. It's also important to recognize high numbers of immigrants and international students are not the only ways to address labor supply concerns in the region or university finances, but it may have been an expedient solution in the short run, as it's been very difficult to deal with some of these other longer-term challenges with the labor market, like EI reform, like what's a sustainable size of the post-secondary education sector. And so as a consequence, we've now run into a problem that the region has gone out on a limb, relying on international students to solve a number of different problems, and that's not going to potentially be capped.
Professor Emery, you have 6 minutes and 13 seconds. Please wrap up.
I'm done.
Thank you very much. Now we will go to Mr. Maxime Colray for 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Merci.
Thank you for giving me the floor, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, Vice Chairs, committee members, my name is Maxime Coléré. I'm responsible for government relations at the University of Quebec. Thank you for welcoming today to talk about international students, more specifically the introduction of a capping measure by the federal government. I think that it's important to hear from the University of Quebec because we have an issue of accessibility for studies in French, and we have 10 establishments currently in over 40 municipalities across Quebec. Just to give you an idea of the impact of the University of Q. In our student population currently, about 50% of students are the first to study in their family to study at the university level. We gave 850,000 diplomas and nearly 750 professors, 30,000 scientific students, and that demonstrates the scope of the University of Quebec, but also the importance of international collaboration and the place of international students. So if we take all of that as an overview, University of Quebec is the largest university in North America in terms of, it is as large as the University of Toronto. It's 18% of our students are international students, a number that has been growing, but controlled growth. In the last 10 years, it went from 11% to 18%. last year, or for about a year now, the federal government announced a number of measures to reduce or restrict international students in Canada in 2024. A platform of 485,000, and that was to address abuses by some actors who were using immigration as a business model. And we know that Quebec manages its own affairs in immigration by providing acceptance certificates to international students in Quebec. And just to give you an example, and Quebec was cited as an example by the minister when he made the announcement. The cap that was established by the federal government on Quebec has an impact on the number of registered students in institutions. However, the application of all members across Canada, which seems to be an issue, and to urge fraudulent actors to cease their activities, which does not concern the University of Quebec or other universities in Quebec. After this first measure, we learned that the federal government wanted to do a downward review of the cap for 2025. The 485,000 permits would be reduced by 10% in 2025. We also learned that master's and doctor's students would be included in the cap. Obviously, this new measure is a concern for us, even if we don't yet know the cap that will be given by province. But master's and university and doctoral students represent 50% of our international students. And concretely, that means that a significant share of students who were excluded from the quota last year this year would now be included. We understand that this measure is once again countering the practices of some actors outside of Quebec who, to get around the previous cap, which required postgraduates, started offering master's degrees, for example. But I would remind you that master's and doctorate programs are regulated in Quebec by the Ministry of Superior Education, which universities and CEGEPs fall under. So this is a generalized measure that is ill adapted to the realities of Quebec and Quebec institutions in general. Furthermore, I would also say that we have assumed our responsibilities to welcome and facilitate the integration of international students as optimally as possible. We have adopted a host of measures that we will discuss later, but I would also like to remind you that Quebec's universities, international students and the communities where they live may be penalized because of the application of this federal measure. Yes, there are actors who do not follow the rules, but they need to take targeted measures rather than using measures that apply across the board. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Corway. Perfect timing, 5 minutes, 5 seconds. So now we will go to Professor Warswick for 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
I just want to say I'm not getting the translation, so I just thought I'd bring it up now.
Warswick, can you hear the translation now? You mean the French or the English you have issues with? Okay.
This is the English channel. Test, test, test. This is the English channel. Test, test. This is the English channel. Test, test, test.
You hear the test, Mr. Warswick? No?
This is the English channel. Tech. Test, test. Test.
Can you change the mic, maybe?
English channel, test, test, test. This is the English channel, test, test, test. English test, English channel.
Not hearing anything?
This is the English channel, test, test, test. English, English. This is the English channel.
We're going to change the mic. Huh? Okay, we'll suspend for a few minutes until we get this fixed. And we can give the floor to Mr. Warswick for 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity. I thought I would make some sort of high-level comments on international students and immigration programs, which is sort of my area of research. So, as I'm sure everyone knows, international students can represent a large win for a country like Canada with a very high-quality post-secondary education sector and a high standard of living. The tuition gained by universities and colleges can be significant, allowing them to put on high-quality programs that benefit both international students and domestic students. And that things like the rental income that international students pay to Canadian landlords can also be significant, an important part of the Canadian economy. Where I think the situation becomes more complicated is if we have a two-step immigration system, where temporary residence, as a temporary foreign worker or international student in this case, leads to preferred access to admission under the permanent immigration system. I think this type of two-step system is appealing in that we often learn a great deal about particular international students through their performance in their studies in Canada. So that's all good. And it also helps avoid problems of foreign credential recognitions for immigrants to Canada, which have been significant for many years. So let me just quickly say what I think are the risks of this type of program, international students in particular. First, a large international student population can create pressure to greatly expand the immigration system beyond what is likely optimal. So in my research with colleagues on this, we find that one would want immigrants arriving under the economic categories to be raising the average skill level of all residents in Canada. I think it's reasonable to expect if a person is doing a university degree that that's going to be the case, that their earnings after they enter the labor market and get established are going to be higher than the average. So it's raising the average skill level. It becomes less clear at the public college level that this would be true, and especially at the private college level. So my suggestion would be to prioritize international student visas such that they only go to programs where the graduates have expected labor market earnings after graduation that are likely to be above average in Canada, at least within a reasonable time frame, say 5-10 years, something like that. I think this would not be difficult to do as we have a lot of data in Canada and analysis on earnings of graduates from Canadian programs and universities. So this is feasible in my mind to do. And this criterion for the allocation of international student visas would likely eliminate all private colleges in Canada. Whether it would eliminate public community colleges might depend on the academic program, but I think this should be ultimately an empirical question for any academic program, whether it be university or college. And so one could address it in a scientific way using available data rather than having universities and colleges lobby government for these visas. The other problem, as I see it, with a large international student program, as we've seen in Canada in recent years, relates to what traditionally has been called absorptive capacity. So the idea here is there's concern that a large number of new immigrants arriving in the country each year could be so high that this distorts wages, prices, or access to key government services. We should be cautious in setting targets or limits on number of international students, given that we do not want the number to be so high as to lead to large-scale rental increases or reductions in access to services such as public health care. I believe that the expansion of the non-permanent resident population in Canada from roughly 786,000 or 2.18% of the population in 2016 to over 3 million or 7.27% of the population in 2024 was likely to far surpass what the Canadian economy was able to absorb. And so the limits that the federal government has put in place on the different international migration programs, but in particular the international student programs, I think are justified, if perhaps happening much later than they should have. Finally, the reports that an increasing number of international students facing the end of their visas may be lodging false refugee claims are very concerning. This would be very costly for the Canadian economy and greatly limit our capacity to control the size of the population. One way to minimize this risk is to use the earnings criterion that we only grant student visas in cases where the person's earnings are likely to be so high or high enough after graduation that they would qualify for admission as a permanent resident under the economic category. If this were the case, it is unclear why a person would ever file a false refugee claim. So in summary, the recent reforms to the International Student Program represent a good first step in terms of regaining control of a program that has been growing at an alarming rate. Recognizing that international students typically wish to gain permanent residency after graduation means that we can have a successful international student program that benefits Canadians. But to do this, we need to focus the allocation of student visas to students entering academic programs that are likely to make them both highly successful in the Canadian labor market and eligible for admission as economic permanent residents to Canada. Thank you again, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Professor Warswick. 5 minutes and 30 seconds. Good timing. And now we are going to honorable members. And I'm going to start with Mr. Commit.
Juste un petit point d'ordre, Monsieur le Président, avec le...
Just a quick point, Mr. Chair. How much are we having 2 rounds, or you didn't say?
5:45 or 5:48 at the most. Okay? Thank you. And with that, Mr. Kimmich, I'll start the watch now. Okay, thank you. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. So Professor Emery first, at the first meeting this committee had, we heard from officials. They mostly said they didn't know anything, but they did mention in their opening statement that the cap and the other policy measures that were introduced were because of unsustainable growth. That's the quote from them. And to reduce student vulnerability. In your opening statement, you talked about the goals that the government may have had. Could you talk about what do you think the goals the government had in putting on the cap, and whether do you think those are the right ones, or do you have different goals that should be reached?
Professor Emery.
I'm going to focus my response from the perspective of the Atlantic region, which I think has a different context from, I think, the cap, which was addressing more of an Ontario-centered problem with the massive growth, particularly in colleges. Atlantic Canada has had increasing dependence on international students, but not at the same rate as the rest of the country. And in New Brunswick in particular, it's only been the last couple of years that we've seen what I would even call large growth, but it's not particularly large compared to what you see in some cities in Ontario. So as a consequence, the challenge with the cap is that the first mover, Ontario, has done a lot of this expansion in a way that it seems like it's had some pretty negative consequences. So the cap, in a sense, makes sense for Ontario, maybe for the large cities, but it is hamstringing the opportunities for other regions like Atlantic Canada to sort of test the waters to see, are the students more effective for staying?
Thank you, Professor Emery. I'm just going to interrupt you. I wanted to ask you that, do you think a one-size-fits-all policy for all of Canada is the right approach then?
Of course not. But it's the one that has often been used for a number of things, including climate policy. So it shouldn't be a surprise that we get a one-size-fits-all policy, because that's sort of what sells across Canada, but it doesn't work for the Atlantic region.
So, Professor Emery, do you think this is going to harm Atlantic Canada and its universities and college systems?
I think it will put a lot of strain on the university and college systems in terms of the labor market. It's not clear to me what the bottom line impact will be, because we also depend on in and out migration, which could include international students from other regions.
So, Professor Emery, do you know if any of the governments or the universities or colleges were consulted before these changes were introduced?
I'm not privy to those kinds of conversations, so it wouldn't be fair for me to speculate what role they might have had.
My next questions are Professor Warswick. I was going to ask about this absorptive capacity that you spoke about. Do you have suggestions on how that would be calculated?
I mean, I think what I'd like to do, I actually submitted a grant application on Friday, and what we'd like to do is use the surge of the population we've seen over the last 7 years to try to estimate it empirically. But I think that there are things you could do without going to that much trouble. Like, people have compared growth in the housing stock to the growth in the population. So if you see that housing is not growing proportionally with the population, that would be, a sign that that this could be an issue.
So you mentioned at the end of your opening statement the case of fraudulent applications at the Immigration and Refugee Board, but there's also other instances of fraudulent activity. We learned at the last meeting of this committee that up to 10,000 fake acceptance letters were fraudulent acceptance letters were identified by IRCC. So this was, big business. They said that it was only in 1 year. This is only after they had introduced this two-step or another layer of security on it. Do you have any other concerns that all these changes that introduced has led to more chaos in the immigration system and especially in the processing of applications?
I think that when you change policy and programs too often, there's going to be confusion and uncertainty. But I think there was an issue of just the volume of people coming into the country. And so I think cutting back on the volume coming in is probably going to help. But it isn't really my area of expertise. So.
Speaking again back to absorptive capacity, there's a lot of people that, and again, you mentioned opening statement, there's a lot of individuals who are seeing their work permits expire, their study permits expire, they don't have an opportunity for renewal, so they're choosing to, and this is being reported in the news, that they're choosing to go and make applications to the Immigration and Refugee Board. Does that speak to anything else in like more chaos? Will we see that keep growing and there'll be even more questions as to the absorptive capacity of Canada, where you will have people who will be waiting perhaps years before they'll know whether they'll get permanent status in Canada and all the uncertainty related to it, the types of jobs that they will take on, the survival jobs they'll take on in the meantime?
Mr. Watson.
I think ideally, you would want an international student system, temporary foreign worker system, where the people coming in realize that they're here temporarily and they would leave if they're not eligible for permanent residency. I think what you're saying is true, that there obviously are processing limitations. So, one could consider extending the work permits, I think, temporarily, given that, again, this isn't really my area of expertise, but it strikes me that we are in a moment of tremendous expansion of our international mobility programs, and we're now trying to ratchet them back down. I would not be averse to saying maybe extend these permits for a year or two, but beyond that, I think either the immigration system should be able to process all these applications, or people should be leaving if they no longer have a legal right to stay in Canada.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Kamich. And I will go to now MP Ali for 6 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for being here today. My question is to Mr. Warswick. As you know, last month, our government introduced that reduction in permanent resident numbers and published population targets for temporary migrants for the first time. And in the Global Mail news article, you recently wrote, you described these changes as, quote, sensible response to the evolving immigration and macroeconomic situation in Canada, end quote. Could you elaborate for this committee on your views to these recent changes, as well as changes made earlier this year to Canada's International Student Program? Could you also expand on what your recommendations would be for the federal government to consider ensuring integrity in the system?
Professor Warswick.
The first parts are maybe easier for me. I think we've not had limits on a lot of temporary migration pathways in the past, and I think that's proven to have been a mistake. I think we should always have targets and limits because of this concern about absorptive capacity. And I would admit it's a notion that immigration economists have been talking about for decades, but it's not that well defined. And to get at Professor Emery's point, there might be a different absorptive capacity than there in Halifax than there is in Toronto. It could well be a regional thing, especially if it's rents that we're concerned about. I've been very critical of the government allowing the situation to expand to the point where, we have in 2024 July, we had 7.27% of the population were temporary migrants. To put it in perspective, the foreign-born population of the United States is 14%. So we have equivalent of per capita half the immigrant of any age, any vintage population in the U.S. are now temporary residents of Canada. So I was responding to the changes in policy they made sense. I think this is the direction we have to go. It's an unfortunate circumstance, but that's the situation. Again, on the integrity of the system, I'm an economist. I'm not a public administration expert, so maybe I'll stop there and answer other questions.
Thank you, Mr. Warswick. Go to honorable member.
Thank you, through Chair. My observation, because I represent a riding in Brampton Center, had a chance that there's an encampment or protest by international students. I had the opportunity to visit their camp. And then Professor Emery was talking about different provinces in Ontario. There's a migration that's of students from one province to another province. For example, they came into different province and then they moved to different institute and transferred them to different province. Do you think the provinces, they had a role to play to balance it out, not approving those camps or satellites or mergers in the different areas?
So you're referring to like the satellite
Yes.
campuses. It's a good question. I mean, I don't tend to blame the institutions. I don't think universities and colleges have staff members who are trained as economists necessarily to be able to think about this. I think it's definitely, the federal government has a responsibility. I think the provincial governments have some responsibility. I think this went off the rails, and I think it's either or both, depending on how you think about it.
Another question, through Chair. You have described our government's recently announced immigration level plans as a quote, return to the previous levels of immigration to Canada, end quote. From your perspective, how might this shift and the recent shift to the international student program contribute to the integrity of Canada's immigration system?
I think that these changes were needed. So, both on the immigration front, the temporary foreign worker front, and the international student front. The international student was probably the most problematic sector in the sense that it had grown the most. And so I think the targets are, I think our challenge right now is we have a stock of temporary residents in Canada that's very large. And so, I watched the Prime Minister's video, I guess it was released on the weekend or maybe late last week, and they were relating it to the long run trend of the population and trying to get back. And I think that's not a bad way to think about it, is to say, we're way off trend. How do we get back to it? Well, one way is to let the temporary resident visas expire. The people who aren't eligible for permanent residency go home or on to somewhere else. And then we get back to a sustainable system. So that all makes sense to me.
30 seconds on
I'll pass it on to you if you wanna. Like on that, your article, I just quote that reduce the pressure on your housing and healthcare sectors. Do you want to elaborate a little bit more based on your expertise on
15
that?
seconds, Professor Warswick.
Yeah, I think coming out of the COVID pandemic, we knew the healthcare system was severely constrained, and then we brought in 1 million or 2 new people, and very few of them are able to work in the healthcare system. So it's hard to see how the healthcare system was going to expand. So cutting these numbers back makes sense.
Thank you very much, honorable member. First of all, I honor. Before I go to the next round, member, I appreciate if once you start the question, before you start questioning, if you can mention who the question is referred to, because of the online, the two of the witnesses can't see our face expression. That is respected. Appreciate that. With that, Mr. Brunel de Sepp for 6 minutes. Please go ahead.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for joining us today. My question is for Mr. Collier. First of all, you talk about the presence of international students in your institutions come with its own challenges. You are telling us that the Quebec universities are assuming their responsibilities. Can you give us examples of measures that you have established to do this? Yes, thank you for the question. I think that everyone is aware that the growth of international students, even if in Quebec, there is significant growth, but it is not uncontrolled growth, but it can be a challenge. And I'm thinking of the agencies that send mass letters. I think there were 99,000 applicants received, which was an increase of 26%. Obviously, not all students are admitted. Out of those 99,000 applications, and I'm thinking of UCO, the University of Quebec in Outaouais, where they received 34,000 applications, and 431 were eligible and 555 were registered. And there were a number of components that we're working on and our responsibilities. We saw recently in the media there were asylum seekers, and the universities assess academic files, and there is an increased candidates from the provincial and federal governments, but we try to ensure that students accepted to our institutions have serious academic plans. They come to study, and we have a number of institutions have assess the applications, and we ensure that we short circuit the agency somewhat, and that we assess the seriousness of the candidates' plans, and we also have an encyclopedia of all of the institutions around the world and the qualities of those institutions, and we also have an IT system that ensures that we can make sure that the diplomas are not counterfeit, and unlike bad actors outside of Quebec, who are mainly outside of Quebec, we don't use immigration as a business model. We look at the seriousness of their academic plans, even if obviously the system is not perfect, but we are working on it. Thank you. You mentioned in your introductory remarks about pan-Canadian measures and that were made here in Ottawa. Perhaps there is a misunderstanding of the education system in Quebec, which is different from what is done elsewhere in Canada. So I'll take, for example, the measure of postgraduate permits. Does that affect you? And is there a dissonance between a measure that is meant for all of Canada, but which is perhaps demonstrating a misunderstanding of the system in Quebec? In Quebec, we have a specific system with the Ministry of Post-Secondary Institutions, and there are post-diploma work permits for, and then before master's and PhD students were exempt from the changes, and there are programs that exist in a number of municipalities in Quebec, and they'll be impacted by this measure to change it for masters and PhDs as well. And that can have an impact on registration numbers, but the universities are developing programs with a 5, 10, 15-year lens, and we can't change things overnight. So if we look specifically at the case of the TESS, in some institutions, we collaborate with diplomas, teaching diplomas, to address labor shortages in the education system in Quebec, and they seek to address labor shortages that we're experiencing currently. And if there are programs that were developed, there's small universities that are anchored throughout the regions, and they are very rooted in their communities. And these are programs that are most of the time developed in collaboration with local communities by reflecting on the local needs of those communities. And pan-Canadian measures are ill-adapted to take into account the local realities of those communities. And these institutions are really rooted in those small communities. If there is a sector that is needed in Community X and it's not on the federal government's priority plan, we may have literal failures because in some regions, the graduation classes are relatively small, and it may mean that the graduating class will not address labor shortages, or they won't have access to the courses they need. So these measures are very difficult to adapt to the specificity of each region, particularly in Quebec. Already? Oh, okay, I'll try to come back to you, Mr. Colleré. Thank you very much. It was great.
We will do now, we will go to, before we go to MP Kwan, after MP Kwan, we will give 2 minutes to Conservatives, 2 minutes to Liberal, 1 Bloc, 1 NDP, and then that's it. So, MP Kwan, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for appearing before our committee today. My question is for Dr. Emery. In a podcast that came out in and around November 7th, I think, there were comments that I think you and your co-host had made about the decision that the government had announced with respect to the immigration levels plan and the international students changes. And they were somewhere along these lines that they were more of a political response and that the government was doing things that are politically expedient in the short run just to take the heat off of the current government. I wonder if you can expand on that comment with respect to that about the decision with the international student changes.
Sure. So the challenge is that, again, I should have been a bit more careful about inferring motive on the part of government, but I will say the lack of study, the lack of discussion prior, and sort of the speed with which those caps came in on the heels of crises like affordable housing and things like that, perception of bad actors in Ontario, growing intense pressure in Ontario universities and colleges for finances. The fact that it happened so quickly without study, without this kind of consultation prior, to me, it seems there's been more discussion after what have the impacts been. That was behind a lot of those comments. And it's also the case in the Maritime region. A lot of the discussion around immigration numbers and the role of international students, it wasn't being studied in terms of absorptive capacity or some of those factors like Dr. Worswick has brought up. It was really just, we need more numbers. And this goes back to 2016 when the idea of just growing international students, immigration numbers in total, was also in a politically expedient way to try and grow the regional economy because there was no clear evidence that it was going to work in a small open economy. You need to stimulate labor demand to get population up. You can't push it by increasing labor supply. So we've had a period of at least 10 years where governments tend to study things after they make the policy decision instead of advance. And so that's part of why I believe a lot of these things are reactionary and they tend to be changes made when things don't go as expected.
Very much. I really appreciate those comments. Now, this has been said already by others that seem to indicate that the government's decision is just a political response to which the housing crisis, by the way, is not necessarily caused by newcomers, but by successive governments, successive Liberal and Conservative governments who's failed on the delivery of housing that people need. Now, I won't expand on that. I've saved that for another day. But people are also saying that, and they fear that there would be this unanticipated consequences as a result of these decisions and the announcement that the government has made. And you touched on your podcast about, and I quote, "We're about to see a lot of dominoes fall like the financial crisis about to hit a lot of the Ontario post-secondary system, and this is going to have a knock-on effects like firms aren't going to find workers, so plants are going to close or threatening to close." So I wonder if you can share with the committee about your thoughts on the broad economic impacts of the international student caps for different provinces and different regions, and particularly those are in rural regions or smaller communities, what those implications might be.
So when you have a Canadian economy, which is increasingly urbanizing around a small number of very large cities and centers, and you have a large number of traditional industries, say like fishing, agriculture, that are being hollowed out in terms of traditional working age population. They are aging more rapidly than the cities. Getting workers into those regions to maintain production in plants which are not investing in automating, they remain highly dependent on labor. That's where, again, a lot of these decisions around immigration was coming through as a reaction to the lack of investment we see in Canada in advanced manufacturing, in automation. We're keeping the legacy plants going by finding a new supply of labor to replace the traditional younger Canadian labor supply, which was no longer there. The challenges in Ontario with their post-secondary system are different than the challenges we're facing, let's say, with labor supply needs in the Atlantic region. And so in Ontario, I don't know if they were planning to use the increase in college-educated, let's call it personal service workers coming out to solve some of the healthcare problem like they were in Atlantic Canada. But the direct ties in the college system in our region, we're looking at programs that would produce graduates that could go to work in, say, the care sector. So there was at least some thinking, I think, around how do we find the care workers for the population that isn't getting access to the services they need. But again, there was no study in advance on does that work. It was based on a belief that you train them, the jobs will be there and they'll take the jobs. But it's a rambling answer. But the real reason I think we did a lot of this was the labor shortage narrative that came in. A lot of employers were struggling to make ends meet with a lot of the margins and labor market policies coming in. If you can't raise your wages, you need to find another supply of labor to keep the lights on. And I think that's what was happening in a lot of places.
So, can I just make one quick comment? In other words, to summarize that, is to bringing in cheap labor. And now that the government has another crisis, they want to blame the people that were brought in to provide cheap labor on the crisis that the government themselves created.
Thank you, MP Kwan. And now we will go to Mr. Reddy Cobb for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Worswick, I just wanted to clarify something. You talked about when we bring immigrants in, we should be raising the average skill level. You talked about average wages and things like that. And you seem to imply to me that universities, for sure, colleges, and private, not often. What about polytechs and some of the jobs that are, like some of the trades jobs and some of the areas where we have great needs and wages are very good? Are you saying that we shouldn't be bringing people in for that?
No, I mean, what I'm sort of suggesting is we should make the decision for allocation of international visas to higher education institutions based on expected earnings. So if the polytechnics you're talking about, if the graduates have high earnings, then we should allocate international student visas to them. And maybe there are programs at universities that don't meet that criteria. I think we need to sort of, the way we use the comprehensive ranking system for immigration, I think we should try to develop something that's similar for international students. Because otherwise, I just think lobbying and politics are going to just drive this, and we're going to end up placing international students in the wrong institutions. And I do think we have absorptive capacity issues. So I think we're constrained in that regard. Our healthcare system just can't expand fast enough to handle the kind of volumes of people coming in that we've had.
Thank you. Mr. Emery, the Prime Minister talked about bad actors taking advantage of the programs, essentially blaming the problems in the immigration system on bad actors. He talked about too many colleges and universities using international student programs to raise their bottom lines. He talked about scammers targeting vulnerable immigrants. Do you agree with the Prime Minister that it was the designated learning institutions, the universities and colleges essentially, they're to blame for the fraud and the errors that happened in this program, or does the government bear some blame in this?
30 seconds, Mr. Emery.
It sounds to me like there's been a failure of oversight in the implementation of who had the right to invite students in. I don't believe universities were abusing it to the degree we saw in some of those private colleges. So I think it's a regulatory failure or a policy failure.
Okay, almost done. Thank you. Okay, just 1 second, according to my watch. So I would love to welcome Mr. Char to the committee, but as I know you are probably want to ask question, but unfortunately I have to go to Mr. Chang for 2 minutes. Mr. Chang, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you, my question is directed to Mr. Colorette. In a 2021 study, economist Pierre Fortin found Quebec would have to invest an additional $1.4 billion per year in universities to bring their funding in line with that of other Canadian provinces. Given reports that provinces underfunded their post-secondary institutions, leading to an over-reliance on international students' tuition, in light of this, don't you think the recent federal changes to the International Students Program were a direct result of provinces not adequately addressing the needs of post-secondary institutions? And also, and do you have other recommendations for the committee to consider, especially in light of Quebec's jurisdiction on immigration and the bill regarding international students?
Mr. Harvey.
Merci pour la question.
Thank you for the question. I think that, well, Mr. Fortin, the economist that you cited, is quite right. The universities have a chronic underfunding issue in Quebec, and the University of Quebec last year tabled a budget brief to the government of Quebec where we talk about historic delays of $100 million, and we need equivalent funding to other universities. Each year we accumulate significant debt, but I would remind you that for the Quebec University of Quebec network of universities, for the University of Quebec, we charge roughly $21,000 a year. For Quebec students, we receive $18,000. In terms of pedagogy and welcoming services for our network at the University of Quebec, we need to undo the myth that they're a cash cow, that they bring in a lot to the universities, because in the specific case of the University of Quebec, that is not the case. In terms of what the federal government could do to improve the situation, well, the answer is relatively difficult. What the government of Quebec is currently doing, it is adding to the level of complexity, because the federal government acts and the province of Quebec does different things, and we're caught in the middle. And it's certain that if we want to improve the situation, if we want to keep universities viable, I think that the federal government should, at minimum, take into consideration the Quebec context and exclude superior education from Quebec. That would be a minimum.
Thank you very much, Mr. Corre and Mr. Chang. We went overtime on this one. Mr. Bruno Duceppe for 1 minute, but I will.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be quick. You talked earlier that about 50% of international students do post-secondary institution studies. How will the federal government affect this? 50% of our students are postgraduate, but what's more telling is that we have 8,000 post-secondary students or graduate studies, but the scientific research depends on the presence of these postgraduate students. Professors work with them. They work in laboratories. They're the ones who produce research in collaboration with professors. The entire innovation system relies on international graduate students. It's so important that in some programs, professors at the University of Quebec are not able to launch research projects because they don't have enough graduate students. So 40% of our international students are graduate students, and we don't know right now what will happen to them. But there will be an innovation problem particularly within the University of Quebec. Thank you. Thank you.
So we will go to MP Kwan for 1 minute. Please go ahead.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I want to go back to Dr. Emery. I still remember actually when the government announced the Atlantic Province's special immigration measure back in those days. So given that this is where we are now with this situation, do you have any suggestions or recommendations of how the government should adjust their plans, especially in addressing the problems that you anticipate for rural and smaller communities?
Professor Emery.
So I think that the big missing discussion is a statement of the goals that you're trying to achieve with this type of immigration policy. And in a lot of the discussion even we've had this afternoon, it's sort of been about numbers, absorptive capacity, but not so much about what are we trying to achieve? Is it innovation? Is it labor supply? Is it growing the high-skilled population? But if you don't know what goal you're trying to achieve, then I don't know what we can actually recommend. Because if the goal was to bring in lower skilled labor for the short term to boost up some university finances, it was working well, and putting the cap in was probably a mistake. If the goal was long-run population development and skill development, it probably needed to be more tailored to where the labor market needs. What is the innovation system you're trying to seed? But that's not the discussion we're having.
Very much, members.
Chair, I'd like
I
to
have
ask,
Mr. Morris.
Thank you, Chair. Asking for unanimous consent from colleagues for a minute and a half of questions.
All in favor? All good. So I will give Mr. Morris 1.5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, colleagues. Professor Warswick, wanted to share with you why this is of particular interest to me. You shared earlier that when the temporary resident population went from 786,000 to 3 million, you called that going off the rails. In my community, there's a college that has raised their population of international students from 760 some odd to over 30,000 within a decade. And so that has had significant impacts in my community. You spoke about the ability to absorb. The ability of my community to absorb that population growth has been challenged. My question for you, over a year ago, I put forward a number of measures that I've been able to work with the minister on. Some of them have been put forward. A number haven't. And so I'm looking to continue to build support for these. I'd like to put one of those to you, and that is to have designated learning institutions that have more than 15% of international students who never actually enroll in a course, that there would be maybe a limiting of visas from IRCC to those DLIs. That's something that a number of countries have already done around the world. Canada hasn't yet. Is that something that's on your radar already? And is there a comment you'd like to share with the committee on a proposal like that?
It seems like a very good idea to me. I think there's a real concern that our international student program at times is turning into a de facto temporary foreign worker program, which is not the intent. So I would support what you've told me about it anyway.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the committee members, I want to thank Professor Emery, Professor Warswick, and Mr. Corre for your input to the committee members here. Thank you. With that, very best to you. And I want to thank the honorable members for staying a bit late today, and the staff, of course, the interpreters and Mr. Clerk and the technical support. Thank you very much. With that, I will see you next Thursday.
you.